The Columbus Blue Jackets have the best prospect system in the NHL. That's not a hot take. That is just math. We're talking about the 5 biggest names and who they could be adding in this draft in the summer.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Today, we have got a solo episode, not a solo episode. It is a episode that I recorded this weekend with Byron Bader of Hockey Prospecting. He does some really cool statistical work in how likely an NHL player is to be a star, a top tier guy, a depth player, an NHL player at all. He's got like 30 years of data to work with, and it's a really, really cool model. And his model has the Blue Jackets ranked at the very top. So we are going to talk about why that is. We're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the more fun names on that list. And we're talking goalies as well, which is always fun. You know, we love to talk goalies here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I just want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets, free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube, and also on Sirius XM. I just want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Let's just jump right into it, because Byron is much smarter than me and says a lot of things much better than I can. So I'm just going to jump straight into my conversation with him. So the Blue Jackets are kind of a disappointment at the minute, but one thing that keeps me going is the future seems pretty bright for this team. And I was, doing what I do, messing around on Twitter, and I saw this statistical model that had the Blue Jackets listed as the best prospect pool in the NHL. So I reached out to the guy that runs it, developed it. We're talking to Byron Bader today, and I figure let's just jump right in. How did you get started in this kind of prospect work?
Well, I've always done like analytics and data analysis, like ever since I was essentially a little kid, but I do that professionally in my kind of 9 to 5 world as well. And I've always been a massive hockey fan and looked at stats and that type of thing. And I was writing for Flames Nation, which is like a analytics based blog about the Calgary Flames. And I was noticing just different stuff with the numbers, and it's based on this thing called NHL equivalency. So basically every league has its own equivalency of how scoring relates to the NHL. So like the OHL is different from the QMJHL, which is different from college and different from all the Euro leagues. And it was actually with Johnny Gaudreau when he was kind of coming up through the college ranks. He just had this really high equivalency that not a lot of players have had. And so I started to wonder, specifically, is that what like a superstar looks like before they kind of hit the NHL? Do they tend to have these high numbers? And I dug around on the internet figuring this must have existed somewhere. And it kind of existed in little snippets, people looking at little samples or anything, but there wasn't really a model like this. So yeah, after digging around for a while, I looked at it a little bit and analyzed a couple of drafts and looked at, the ones that come out, or I looked at Hall of Famers and what they tended to look at like before they sort of made the NHL, and they all had these really high numbers. So then I just sort of started slowly building this model. It wasn't really a model at the start, but started slow, and then it turned into this thing where now I have 30 years of data, and it tells the story of what happens with these prospects and what they tend to look like, the moment before they make the NHL, and then how that sort of scoring equated by each league, how that relates to the NHL. So that's how I kind of got started. It was kind of a fluke, really, but all kind of related to my background and stuff. So
yeah, I feel like a lot of people get into hockey kind of by accident. Like I got into hockey a little bit by accident, and now here I am. But I guess the interesting thing about the way that your model works, and like correct me if I'm massively off here, but it's constantly creating more data for itself, if
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's a constant stream of like you say, you look at Johnny Gaudreau, and now you can look at players that are having similar type situations or similar seasons to Johnny Gaudreau, and then kind of projecting from there. And Johnny Gaudreau is actually a really good example because now he is a Blue Jacket, which is just fun for me and probably less fun for Flames fans. But
Yeah.
we love him
Very
here
not
on
fun for
Columbus.
us. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoy him because we adore him as Calgary fans, but that's how it goes. But yeah, no, it's that's the great thing about it. Like it always gives you new stuff to talk about because every year, there's 200 or so guys getting drafted, and there's realistically 300, 400, 500 players that teams are looking at. So every year you kind of have this gigantic base of players to talk about and say, hey, this guy, looks like all these guys that were drafted, or this guy looks like these 5 people from the last 30 or 40 years. So like this guy's very, very rare, like Connor Bedard, this generational talent, the way he looks in the model, like he looks like McDavid and he looks like Crosby and he looks like Wayne Gretzky. And that's like really cool thing to see that he's talked about being like a generational guy, and then when you look at it in the model, it's like he looks exactly like that. He looks like that. No questions asked. He's going to be a superstar in the NHL type thing. So yeah, it's really fun. And there's every year, even if it's a strong draft or a weak draft, there's always new things to talk about, new things to kind of compare in the model. So yeah, that's what I love about it.
Yeah, for sure. I am just going to preface this with we are recording this before the draft lottery happens on Monday. We're recording this on Sunday night. So Bedard might be a Blue Jacket or a future Blue Jacket, I guess. Things could go horribly wrong or horribly right, depending on how you look at it. But I wanna cut into kind of talking about the Blue Jackets prospects specifically because I feel like every fan base thinks that their prospects are all incredible and gonna be superstars, and like I'm guilty of that myself, and I know that it's not. I am biased because I pay more attention to the Blue Jackets prospects than I do, the other 31 teams worth of prospect. But your model has the Blue Jackets ranked as having the best prospect system in the league. Can you talk a little bit about like what exactly makes them so strong? Is it that they have is it that they have a couple of really highly rated guys, or are they just strong across the board?
Yeah, I'd say it's more the highly rated part. I mean, they've only really been building it up for the last 2 years, where they've kind of been trying to rebuild like that. Kind of before that, they were sort of a fringe playoff team, I'll call it. So they had a pretty weak pool at that point. But yeah, I mean, it's basically the rankings are based on essentially 5 categories. So there's 2 categories basically looking at the top 5 prospects in the system, which is kind of based on who the public or who the media or whatever would consider really your top 5 prospects and what they look like in the model in terms of their star probability. So their likelihood of turning into like an offensive producer on a team, sort of an outlier producer as a forward or a defenseman. And then there's the NHL component of their top 5. So how likely are they to actually make the NHL? And then there's kind of these other 2 categories related to the skaters that are related to the depth of the system. So how many players they have in the system that have some semblance of being a star or some semblance of making the NHL. How many of those do they have in the system? And then the 5th part is basically looking at their goalies and essentially like their top 2 goalies in the system and really looking at what's the likelihood that they actually have like an NHL goalie that's going to play at least 100 games in there. So there's basically 5 components is how you make it up. And so the Blue Jackets, they rank like I think first and second in terms of like their top 5 in terms of star probability and NHLer probability. And so I'm looking at their top 5 because most teams you only have like a couple really good prospects. That's why you're looking at the top 5, right? Like some like Boston and the Islanders and like Washington, Pittsburgh, they have like horrible prospect systems because they've been contenders this whole time. So like even if you look at their top 5, like you're almost reaching at some points because there's so little there. But with the Blue Jackets, like their top 5 is Urasek, Matachuk, Marchenko, Kent Johnson still counts right now because he hasn't played 100 games, and then Jordan Dumais. So that's their top five, and it's just like it's loaded. Like all five of them look like they're for sure going to make the NHL. I would say. I mean, based on the model, when you look at players that look like that, those are the ones that make the NHL. That's what they look like, and then the star probability on top of that is like massive across all five of them. Like there's probably at least one star in there, maybe two. Maybe you get lucky and you get three in there. Probably not, though. Probably one, and then you might get one that's kind of like a fringe star, like kind of right on the line type thing.
In a minute, I've got more of my conversation with Byron about the Blue Jackets prospects. But first, there's no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build your team. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. It's the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't have to spend hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills. Indeed's powerful hiring platform can help you do it all. They streamline hiring with powerful tools that find you matched candidates. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to the data, according to Indeed data in the US. I love Indeed. Whenever I have been unlucky enough to be job hunting, I always go to Indeed. It's the only platform that I use, and it should be the only platform you use as well. It's the only job site where you pay for the applications that meet your must-have requirements. You can join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/locked-on. Offer is good for a limited time. Indeed.com/locked-on for your $75 credit now. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
And then their depth is okay. I mean, they have, I think, 12 or 13 guys in the system that have like some semblance of, NHL likelihood. That is still a piece that's growing because they've really only been building this out for 2 years. But basically, like across those five categories, like they're, in the top five, I think in 4 out of 5 out of them. So, I mean, they're just, it's basically across the board, but it's mostly right in that top 5 because it's so good and there's just so much potential in there. And then as well, their goalies with Tarasov and Ivanov. One of those look like they'll probably hit as a goalie as well. So, I mean, they don't really have any missing pieces. I mean, they could get some more prospects, get a like elite centerpiece. Like if they end up getting Fantilli or they get Bedard, perfect. But yeah, like it's mostly in that top 5 that's just so far beyond most of the other teams. But, the depth is okay, and they're just going to keep on growing that depth this year, especially with, the big draft coming up and all the picks they have. So,
yeah. Is that kind of to be expected? Because the Blue Jacket, like, I don't know a ton about, like, how you rate prospects and what teams, like, have good pools and who don't, but like the Blue Jackets obviously were kind of a fringe playoff team, like you said, and then last year they had 2 first-round picks. The year before that they had 3 first-round picks, and then I think they only had 1 the year before that, but that's still 6 first-round draft picks in the space of 3 years. They've got 2 more today. Is it just because they have all of these picks and they have kind of been a lottery team for the past couple of seasons that you're seeing this, or is it that they have been drafting well on top of that?
Yeah, I mean it's both, obviously. Like getting most of the the high quality picks you're going to get are in the first round, but you could kind of whiff there, right? Like you could take, especially with my model, you could take like a super low probability player. Even these low probability players in the first round, like only 40 to 45% of them make the NHL. So if you set you back, right? And even if they make it, these ones tend to take years and years to develop and make the NHL. And then, some of them turn into a really good player, but it takes 5 years before they turn into something. Whereas, Columbus has had these high picks and they haven't gone, off the board and taken somebody that's going to take years and years to develop. They're taking these really high probability guys that tend to make the NHL earlier and tend to hit as stars and these really big, impactful players. So it's a two-edged sword essentially, and they're they're crushing it on both sides basically. So
yeah, for sure. I want to talk a little bit about the goalies, because, like you said, one of them is bound to hit. They're currently ranked 7th in on their goalies, but yeah. So Tarasov and Ivanov, like, what kind of comparables do they have to NHL players? Like, what does your model think of Tarasov specifically? Really intrigues me because I feel like he's a guy that has kind of had his development derailed a little bit this year, but when I watch him play, I see flashes of like what could be a really, really good goalie in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing with both of them is they're both Russian prospects, which tend to bode well. The model really likes Russian prospects, and I do too, because essentially, I mean, the way the goalie model works is it's not looking at equivalencies because it's goalies, but it's kind of using the same idea, and it's looking at their save percentage and the league that they're playing in, and then it kind of shoots out this goalie score that I've sort of created. So with the Russian systems, because the KHL is such a good league, like it's especially for younger players, it's almost on par with the NHL. And with Russian goalies, the better ones, they're able to go to the KHL like almost right away. Like you'll see a lot of the best ones being in the KHL in their D+1 season or their D+2, D+3 type seasons. Whereas when you look at like a Canadian prospect, most of them come through the CHL, which you're playing against teenagers really, and you can't really go anywhere there. Like unless you're elite, and you make the NHL right away, which happens like once a decade, you have to go back to the CHL for years and see the same shots from the same teenagers, and you can't face those shots from men right away. Whereas in Russia, you can bounce around from the junior league to the VHL, sort of their AHL, and then up to the KHL. Within a week, you can just be bouncing around on the train and playing in all 3 leagues. So there's a lot more mobility to get up and play against, elite men competition. So, I mean, with both of them, they're on the KHL track or the VHL, KHL track pretty early. With Tarasov, I think he was there by his D+2 or D+3 season. He was playing in the Liga. So he's playing in all these Euro leagues, which the model really likes. And then when you're looking at Ivanov, he was in the MHL in his draft year, which was just last year, and then he's already up in the VHL. So those are the types of goalies that jump up right away in those leagues, that they just shoot up in the model, and they tend to make the NHL. The Russian ones are a little bit odd because there's a lot of them that have these high probabilities, but some of them don't come over. So they're like the one league in Europe where there's quite a few of them that have these high probabilities, but then they bust out or they miss the NHL because they never come over, because they can make a good living in the KHL rather than riding on the bus in the AHL. But yeah, I mean, these Russian goalies that hit these tracks early, a lot of these ones are the best ones in the NHL. Like you look at Vasilevsky, you look at Sorokin, Shesterkin, they all did this, and so they don't look quite as good as them quite yet. I mean, Ivanov might get there. He looks really good for a guy just drafted 10 months ago type thing. But yeah, those best Russian goalies, they all look like that. They hit the KHL track early and they just shoot up like that, and then they come over when they're 24 or 25, and then that's what you get. So that's why it really likes those two. And yeah, I think one of them for sure will hit.
In a minute, I am going to finish up my conversation with Byron. We're going to be talking about the future and, who the Blue Jackets could be adding in the draft. We did record this episode before the draft lottery on Sunday, just as a heads up, but we still have a lot of fun things to say. Before that, though, I don't know about you, I am stressed basically all the time, and going to like a sporting event should not be stressful. It should be fun. Going to a concert should be fun. So why should buying tickets be stressful? With Gametime, it's not. They've got killer deals on last minute tickets. They've got a best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets, start getting hyped for the fun you will have. Gametime has flash deals. They've got last minute tickets. They've got a low price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you'll never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. It's a very kind of high-risk, high-reward position, especially with the Russian aspect of it. Because, like you say, sometimes they just decide that they don't want to come to North America. Tarasov's already here, which feels like it's good.
Yeah, he's
good
already
news for
playing.
his development. I would love to see him get an entire season in the AHL instead of flip-flopping between the NHL and the AHL, because that can't be good for his.
With goalies, I don't mind it, like flopping in between, you know, the NHL and the AHL, like especially if he gets like 20 games in the NHL or something, and then kind of the rest you use him in the AHL. It's you know, especially how it kind of comes out in the model, like, you know, it takes a long time for goalies to develop and get to the point that they're not only in the NHL, but they're actually, you know, winning you games and not just kind of there. So yeah, I mean, he probably still has even a few more years before it's like, okay, now he's here, and he was drafted in 2017. So yeah, it takes forever with goalies, but I think he's on a great path, and certainly seems like he's on his way for sure. So.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about a player who doesn't technically count as a prospect anymore, which does feel weird considering he's not even 20 years old yet. But Cole Sillinger had such a good rookie season, and then his sophomore season, he kind of fell off a cliff a little bit. I think partially that was coaching, the team was bad, confidence. I think that sophomore slump is always a thing. How does the model feel about Cole Sillinger as a player? Because I'm not worried yet, especially if it looks like he's still on track to be a really good player.
Yeah, no, I was really high on him when he was drafted. He was kind of, you know, one of my sort of top 10 favorites when I was looking at him in his draft year. And like you said, his rookie year immediately in the NHL was good. I probably would have liked to see him, you know, go back to whether it be the CHL or if he ended up in the USHL or whatever it would be. I probably would have liked to see him go back just to, because what happens with those guys that are like have those really good draft years, but not the super, super elite ones, is they go back and then they have this gigantic D+1 year. And then these guys come back into the NHL and they just tend to thrive a little bit more. Whereas when they come right into the NHL like that and, you know, don't knock the cover off the ball right away, like, you know, it tends to harpen, you know, their likelihood that they're going to turn into a star. So that is the only part I didn't like about, you know, using him so quickly in the NHL. And then, like you said, this year he really fell off again. So it did tank his star probabilities quite a bit, because, you know, essentially the draft year and the D+1 year are like the most important years in the model, but the D+2 year is important as well. And you want to see him sort of progressing and hitting these higher numbers. So yeah, I mean, it's probably fallen off quite a bit that I don't think he's going to be a star anymore, unfortunately. But and maybe that could have, you know, that trajectory could have been changed if he went back to, you know, the juniors for his D+1 year. Maybe it would have set him off on a whole new path. So yeah, I'm curious where he ends up in you know 3 to 5 years time though.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I don't think he's like. I've seen a lot of people calling him a bust this season, which again does feel insane because he's not even 20 years old. I think people use that too early, but I do think there is a bit of kind of cause for concern with just how sharp that drop off was. So I think next season is going to be really big for Sillinger. Whether he spends that in the AHL getting his confidence back, whether he makes it back up to the NHL and gets, you know, consistent ice time, line mates, etc., then I think it's going to be really interesting. In terms of the kind of the top 5 prospects that you mentioned earlier, so we're talking Jiricek, Matejchuk, Marchenko, Johnson, and the 5th one I have forgotten. John Dumais, that's the one. There are 2 names there to me that really stand out as like those blue chip prospects, and that's Jiricek and Kent Johnson. Kent Johnson had, I think, a way better rookie season than I was honestly expecting from him. I think he grew a lot as a player. Can you kind of, is the model kind of, like, where does the model see him kind of ending up in the next kind of couple of years?
Yeah, so he has a really nice progression, not all that common. Like he looks like players like he looked pretty similar to Matty Beniers before he sort of took off this year. Obviously, they were drafted in the same draft, but they were kind of had a very similar progression happening there. So, I mean, that would be great if he ended up something like that. But like other players that kind of fit that mold, Alex Tanguay, Nazim Kadri, like there's not that many players that look like that. But I mean, I could see him ending up kind of just like that, like a Kadri type production where he's kind of, 50 to 60 point center that plays in the top six. That would probably be my estimate of where he'd end up in the next 3 or so years, and then kind of ride that for his prime. Maybe have a couple sort of bigger star seasons, but probably net out as maybe like a fringe star like that.
Yeah, which I mean, I would not be mad about. I feel like he was kind of he wasn't necessarily a weird call to take fifth overall, but I was surprised by it. He was not kind of on my list of players that the Blue Jackets were going to take at fifth overall. On the flip side, David Jiricek was, when I was doing my kind of prospect stuff last season, David Jiricek for me was second on my board. So the fact that he fell all the way to sixth, that was like, this is already a win. For me personally, how does the model feel about Jiricek? Is he going to be that stud that I think a lot of people, me included, think and hope he's going to be?
Yeah, so when he was drafted, like coming out of the Czech league last year, like he looked pretty good, but not, he didn't have like these crazy high numbers like the Rasmus Dahlin or the Victor Hedman type numbers, but they're good. Like, guys that look like that, they always make the NHL coming from those pro Euro leagues like that. He's going to be a minute muncher. He's going to play 20 minutes a night. Is he going to be that like guy that also gets you, 50 points a year? Maybe. I mean, the year he had this year really jumped him up in the model because I think his star probability as of last year, I think was around 20%. And then after his AHL year, which I think he had the highest equivalency in the AHL for a D+1 D-man, basically ever, or essentially that the model exists, really jumped him up huge. So now I think he's at like a 40% chance of becoming a star. And you look at guys that, kind of look similar to him at the draft and then jumped up like that. Again, there's not many, but the ones that did do it, it bodes well. Like you have like Adam Fox, he was in college, obviously, but then you have Rasmus Dahlin, and then, or sorry, not Rasmus Dahlin, Rasmus Sandin from the Maple Leafs, and Drysdale from Anaheim. So I mean, all these guys are super young and just kind of making their mark now, but all of them look like they're progressing somewhere very nice. So yeah, he's at about 40% right now. But I mean, if he keeps on putting up seasons like that, like whether that's in the NHL right away, if he goes back to the AHL for another season, that's going to grow and grow. And then you could have something that's, more substantial in the next few years for sure. So I'm very intrigued by him.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I think he's going to be probably full-time NHL next season, which is
I think so too.
going to be really, really exciting. I think he and Werenski are gonna do really well together. I want to kind of finish up. This might be a bit of a weird question that's kind of hard to answer, but is there like on the for all the Blue Jackets prospect, like who has kind of the most interesting or weird trajectory, if that makes sense? Is there anyone that was like drafted low that feels like they're gonna shoot up the rankings, or like, does that make sense?
Yeah. No, there's that Stanislav's Zvosiel. Is that how it's pronounced? I can never pronounce names right. But anyways, that guy, he looks very interesting because he started off, I think, in the Czech league, and he has a super, super low equivalency, which is what you almost see from a lot of players who don't make the NHL, or they're like pure shutdown guys that the model doesn't like, but they come into the NHL and they end up as these like really defensive defenseman prospects. But he's shot up huge. Like he was playing with Bedard, obviously, the last 2 years, I think. And he's got this really weird trajectory because normally, even coming from a pro Euro League and then going to, something like the CHL and jumping up like that, like you don't go from almost nothing to, like an equivalency in like the 95th, 99th percentile over the course of 2 years. That's very rare, I would say, especially for a defenseman. So he's probably lowballed a little bit in the model, to be honest. Like he probably has, I think he's at like a 29% chance of becoming an NHL right now because of how odd he looks. But he's probably higher up on that. The Blue Jackets are probably, higher on him than that 29%. So he's one for sure that looks very odd. Jordan Dumais on the other side, like I'm sure Blue Jackets fans are aware of him and how he's, his D+1 season, how big it was. But like he looked great at the draft too. The big thing with him is he's like 5'8" or 5'9", short, so they're always going to fall. But he looks like he's young too. I think he's born in the summer or the spring. I can't exactly remember where, but he's youngish, anyways. His birth date, and typically like a guy like that would get drafted in the first round, but because he's so small, he gets drafted, I think, in the third round. And like that progression is just really, really nice. Players don't often look like that, and especially make that jump like that in their D+1. The ones that do, looking at the ones that basically came from the CHL, you have like Brad Richards, Jonathan Huberdeau, Ray Whitney, Sam Bennett, Gabe Velarde. Like that's basically the list. Maybe I think Corey Emerton was another guy that never really made the NHL, but got close. But like, his potential is massive. Like he's I think people are starting to really pick up on him, but like his whole progression and the age, like I'm really high on him. And I think he's going to be like this like sneak attack, like really good player that maybe people aren't expecting him to be as good as he could be potentially. So he's kind of an oddball, I guess, the other way that, I'm really high on. And I think he could be better than a lot of people think he could be. I think people are starting to see that maybe he could be kind of like a middle six player, but maybe he's like a top six fixture with how he looks in that progression. Because like I said, it's not all that common, and the ones that do it, like they're almost always like a top six rotation type player. So I'm curious where he ends up too.
Yeah, he was a guy that the Blue Jackets drafted him, and the third round is kind of where my knowledge of prospects kind of drops off, because I try every year and there's just so many of them and I can't keep track of every single prospect. So like I tend to get the first round is pretty down and then some guys in the second, but like they drafted John Dumais and I was like, okay, let's check this kid out. And then I realized that he was like third in the entire QMJHL in scoring, and he went in the third round. And I just I think a lot about another small player that dropped way down in the draft rankings and then had 115 points last season, So we'll bring it all the way back around. I don't think he's going to be a Johnny Gaudreau type player, but
the
potential is there. I feel like once you see 5'8", everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people write him off as well. Is he going to be able to do it in the NHL?
Yeah. Yeah. Like he doesn't have like the shiftiness or the speed like Johnny has, which has always been able to carry him because he just can attack through transition like a machine. But that's, you get these short guys every year that drop. You have, Lane Hudson that the Canadians got, another short, he's a D-man. He just barely got drafted at the very end of the second round, and he looks like incredible. Like he's putting up numbers in college that we haven't seen in like 3 or 4 decades. Like the short players, you see a player like 5'10" and below that, if he was 2 inches taller, he'd be going, no later than the early second round. I always love those players because, a lot of them hit a lot more than I think people realize. That's where something like my model shows and kind of points towards is, these elite producing small players, they hit and turn into like stars or superstars a lot more than I think teams realize. I'm always cheering for the shorties.
Yeah, so I love it when short players succeed. I think because I am also a 5'10" hockey player, and like I play beer league, but I'm always rooting for the short guys to make the NHL.
I'm like 6'2" and like 200 pounds, but for some reason I always like the short players myself too. I've always, ever since I was a little kid, I've always loved. Like we grew up on Theo Fleury and Marty St. Louis, and even like Mark Savard and stuff like these. I've always liked the short goal scoring, playmaking guys for some reason, even though I'm
They're just
well
fun.
above average height. Yeah, it's fun when they make it, and it's just fun that teams are getting better now at drafting shorter players earlier than they used to, but they're still like dramatically undervalued, and they probably always will be, because if you're short, you're going to be downgraded in the draft always. So
yeah, for sure. This was super interesting, super illuminating. If people want to learn more kind of about your model, or they want to, I know on Twitter you've been doing a bunch of like comparison tweets with different prospects and stuff like that, which is super interesting. If people want to kind of learn more about that, they want to get more prospect stuff in their lives, which I highly recommend, where can they find you and your work on the internet?
So on Twitter, I'm at Byron M. Bader. So you can find me there. So like you said, I'll post different player cards and stuff, comparing guys coming up in the draft or guys just recently drafted, and talk about just random things that pop into my mind. And then the site is hockeyprospecting.com. So it's a subscription-based site. So it's $35 a year Canadian, which works out to roughly $25 a year American, to get access to the site. And then you get access to all the stuff we're talking about. So the model goes back to 1990. So you got just over 30 years worth of history there. And so there's almost 7,000 players in the skater side, and then about 1,000 on the goalie side. And yeah, you can go through and compare any players you want. You can look at the prospect pools, so you can see each team and all their prospects sort of lined up with all their probabilities. You can also go back in time and see, who have been the best drafting teams over, 5-year periods or 10-year periods or the last 3 decades. You can look at all that. So yeah, that's all up on the site, and you can get access it for the whole year for $35. And if you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter's usually easiest, and I try to respond to everybody, but sometimes I get distracted, but I do my best.
Well, thanks for sitting down with me today. Like I said, this was super interesting, super illuminating, and fingers crossed the Blue Jackets get to add yet another really, really good piece in the draft lottery, which probably will have already happened by the time this episode airs, but this is me from the past crossing my fingers.
Oh, they have to. There's no way they can't add a foundational piece in this draft with how they've been drafted. So Bedard and Gaudreau would be pretty cool together, I would say.
I would
The
not
shorties just running game. Yeah.
And then Patrick Laine on the other side, who's like 6'5".
Yeah, just so snapping rockets. Yeah.
And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow, Hayden and I will be talking about the CHL playoffs. We'll be checking in on how there's only one league standing for the Blue Jackets, as Luke Delbar Blues and the Sarnia Sting are eliminated. We've got lots of QMJHL talk. And we've also got another prospect profile for you coming a little bit later tomorrow as well. It's going to be a double episode day, which is very exciting. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms. We are over on YouTube. We're on Sirius XM. If you are a radio app person, you can find Locked On Blue Jackets there. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find Hayden at HaydenH971 on Twitter. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. And if you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.